Hello and welcome to this Order of the Golden Dawn vodcast. This is part of the Malta Discussions series. It's number 2 in the series, which we've called Emeralds of the Sea. Notice the plural of emeralds. We'll get into that. It's an allusion to all of the members past, of course, of the Farirah Temple, number 49 of the Smaragdom Teleses. Here I have with me Pat Zalewski. We're sitting here in my study in Malta. My name is Martin Thibeault, and it's a pleasure to get into this, to dive in. Originally, when I had this idea, putting together this particular discussion, Pat actually didn't think it was a good idea. He thought that there wouldn't be any interest in something like this. And one thing that I know for sure, I'm 100% positive about this, is that when it comes to GD history, we hear or we read about members of the original order all the time, whether it's Mathers, Westcott, Horniman, Florence Farr, Aleister Crowley, all these names we've seen time and time again in these different books and biographies and all the different histories that we have of the GD itself. But when it comes to the Farirah Temple, we know very little in terms of what's been written about them. And I think that it would be very unfortunate if somehow they were to fall through the cracks, and we wouldn't get any bits of history about them. We wouldn't even know their names, because there are a lot of people that went through that temple, and you've had the chance, the opportunity to meet a lot of them, but also through them hear about other members, other adepti, other people who contributed to the tradition, who all had something unique to teach, something they brought to the table. So what we've done in this discussion basically is brought up 27 different names. In one group, we have adepti that Pat has personally either talked to or met in person, and then in the other group, people that you haven't met but that you heard about, whether it's stories, anecdotes, things that they contributed to the temple. You heard it through those members that you did talk to. So what we're going to do is I'm going to read these names one by one, go down through this list, and it's not in any chronological order. There's no specific order to it. It's just a list. So I'll name the person, whatever grade they were in, and Pat will share with us maybe however little or however much information you know about them, just to have it in video form so that everyone can benefit from that. Obviously, scholars, anyone doing research into the history of the GD, this will be tremendously beneficial. And of course, there are the kinds of anecdotes and stories and experiences that it's impossible to get otherwise unless you've met these people or you heard these stories firsthand. So,
well, I would say that while I've spoken sometimes about individual people in separate videos, what we're trying to do here is make it so that people can do the research on them. Now, some of the research for these names, the best place you can find them is called Papers Past in New Zealand, which is a wonderful research tool. It talks about journals, it talks about newspapers, and very other published aspects. And what if you combine that with the people I'm going to be discussing, and the Papers Past give you a time frame which operates under certain conditions. So we're trying to project this out so people can do more research. When you read Bob Gilbert's books, they're very, very good at what they do, but there's nothing about New Zealand. Everything he writes about different temple members, but when it comes to New Zealand, there's a big question mark. Well, from my work and Tony Fuller's work on the forum, you understood there's been a lot more to it. And now we're going to go over some of the names that I've met. And of course, Tony has met some of these people as well, and he knows a different set of names, but we're concentrating on the ones that I know at the moment. And I'll pass that on to you, what I know about them, and you can do your own individual research, probably through Papers Past or through additional letters and things, collections that you might have.
I'm really glad we're doing this because, as I mentioned in the previous discussion, and it's been mentioned again and again, and most people who've looked into GD history know this, Farirah was the longest standing temple in GD history. It was a massive temple with hundreds and hundreds of members that went through there. So obviously it's important to give it its proper place in history. Just remember that some of this is going to be, there might be a lot of information about certain people and very little about others. I have no idea how long this discussion will last, but let's get into it. 27 names. I'll bring them one at a time, and
lead
we'll
on.
do it. Okay. The first one we have on the list is John von Dadelszen, 9 equals 2.
Yeah, he was the main chief of Whareroa when it closed. He was very stern individual, tall, about 6'3". Not exactly a person that you get warmth from, but he did know his business. I've met John, and he was also influential. And when the temple closed down, he was the one that wanted it done. And he went to Tauhara, which is the second phase of the Golden Dawn teachings, and become one of the trustees of Tauhara. So he transferred his aspects concerning not occultism, but just generalization, and put them into Tauhara, which Mrs. Falcon founded. But getting back to John von Dadelszen, he was a lawyer by trade, a very wealthy individual. I think he had shares in newspapers and things. A very, very stern person, and a very, very hard taskmaster at ritual. In other words, he would tell you where to stand, how to hold your sword, where to move, and even got to the point where telling you to follow cracks in the floor. For that particular ritual, you'll be able to find your way. John was really good at stage direction, but lacked, in my opinion, understanding the true teachings of the order. And this I've brought up many, many times before. Frank Salt said it best about John. He just never got it. And so his interest in Whareroa, I think, he was put in a position where he felt he was the only one able to handle it, or people thought he was, and he just didn't want to do it. And so he handled it for a few years and then decided it was just too much. And some more stuff came to light about the original house, and who was owned originally by the Chambers family, not transferred. There's a lot of stuff that went on. So, but he was really a figurehead, not liked by many. He was a coroner. I think it was in Hastings on Napier. I'm just not too sure which one. And Percy Wilkinson, my friend, used to say, well, the only thing good about John von Dadelszen is he presides over dead bodies as a coroner. I didn't quite take Percy's view on that, but that was his opinion, and it wasn't lost on other people. But he was not liked. His intellect was good, but he didn't understand the order in any three-dimensional context. He could give you stage directions on how to hold your sword, but that's as far as it went.
Quite interesting too that he's 9 equals 2. It's something I bring up every video, but that these grades really were implemented in the
Oh yeah, they were implemented, and there were rituals. When von Dadelszen had to go for his 9 equals 2, there was no one around to do it, but except Hugh Campbell, who we'll discuss later. He had a 9 equals 2, so he had to come, and he was never a chief. He had to come and initiate von Dadelszen into the 9 equals 2 grade, and that was the interesting part. Matter of fact, Hugh Campbell's wife mentioned that she knew more about the preparations for a 9 equals 2 because she had to prepare all the food for. That's another story.
Speaking of wives, that's actually the second name we have on the list. Is I don't know how to pronounce her name. Mikela
von Dadelszen.
Mikela von Dadelszen. She was 8 equals 3.
That's right. Mikela von Dadelszen was 8 equals 3. She was the daughter of Reginald Gardner, who was one of the first chiefs and the main instigator of the Christian order that they were doing it. Everyone looked up to him. Very influential in many, many areas. Very well off family. Now, her problem was that she never liked the order, even though she got to 8 equals 3. She was pushed there by her father and by people that knew the family. That's why they pushed both for her and John von Dadelszen. Getting back to John von Dadelszen, his father was also a member of the order. His father, I think, was a mayor, if I got it right, as a mayor of Havelock North, which was then a small village. Then John took over, and later Havelock North was amalgamated into one of the cities. I'm not too sure which one, Napier or Hastings. But it was really interesting. So she didn't like the order much because people were. Dr. Falcon used to tell her that for a skin condition that she had to wear green socks. So she go to school in green socks, and everyone pointed the finger and laughed at her. So she really, really did not like the order, and she conveyed as much to friends of mine who knew her quite well, and they passed this on to me. But when I met her, I found her very, along with John, amiable. she was one other thing too. She was the order that they were a member of, which was a Quaker order in New Zealand that formed the basis of Whare. They used to put on pageantry plays, generally Arthurian, believe it or not. And so she was always photographed in these pageantry plays. So she had to participate in all of this. And she really didn't want to, if all the people that I've spoken to have said that, people that knew her, and she's mentioned certain things to them. This is the feeling that I got. She got very, very upset if she's criticised in any way, shape or form. When friends of mine did a 5-6, and I think she took the part of the chief adept. They couldn't hear her too well, and I mentioned it, and she got very, very upset.
So I'm glad you brought up Falcon, because we actually left Dr. Falcon and his wives and daughter out of this list here, because they do get talked about
Well, we're doing the
considerably.
list as I knew people and as I spoke to people, but we could add it to the.
Yeah, but what I was going to say is they're obviously going to come up again and again, because they're connected to
Yeah,
everyone.
yeah.
So it's even though they're not actually part of these 27 that we have here, their names are going to pop up in different places. And there is one name that's added in here that wasn't a member of Whare, but that we included because he did come out to New Zealand and met some of these people. Israel Regardie, yeah. So the next one on the list, obviously, there's going to be a lot of information about this. This person is Jack Taylor. Of course, 7 = 4, your personal mentor. Let's hear it.
Well, Jack was very strong Mason, 14th degree Mason. Very powerful influence in magic. He was very mystical. He would take no nonsense and was by the book. Everything had to be by the book. You did this, you did that, as far as Jack went, as far as the ritual goes. But in personal study, he was extremely flexible. He would add to it. He was, I was never sure whether Jack was ever a warden, but I do know that he actually had to teach a lot of people. So I think he may have been, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Possibly Tony Fuller might know more about that than I would, but he was a warden for the area, and which is Napier. And everyone looked up to Jack for ritual because he was not only a Mason, but good at GD ritual, a former Hierophant, and he would also get into other aspects as well in the OTR, the Order of the Table Round. So he was fully thrust into the Whare nexus, if you want to use that term. And he was a bit of a colour nut. People would call him a colour nut. He was a bit eccentric in some way, but in spite of all the eccentricities, he's extremely, extremely well respected in what he did, and people listened to him. The difference between Jack and a lot of them, they would give you gobbledygook, or Jack would tell you straight what the problem was without any hesitation.
He was a Gemini like you, right?
Oh yeah, well, pretty much. I've held back a little bit in my later years, but Jack was like that. So he was a no-nonsense approach, and he would tell me straight, you do this or so forth, you do that. And he said, I'm worried you're not doing this. I said, well, we have done this, we just haven't set it up to you. So he was really bang on, very, 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 very much like that. But his main focus was when he faced off against von Dadelszen to become chief of the OTR, Order of the Table Round, possession of Merlin. He won that, and von Dadelszen didn't, because von Dadelszen was not liked at all. Jack was of the opinion, while he was still at Whare, that the order had stagnated because there was no new developments. And when he told me that he wanted people to do more research into the order, and they wouldn't budge beyond a certain point because of the background or the worry or the concern. But Jack was all for it. So he said, it came to a point we had a bit of a showdown with him. He said, look, he went down there and he said he met all the uppity-ups from the order, even though he was one himself. And they went over the rituals, and they said, John von Dadelszen said to him, he said, I've been over all the rituals and I can't see one single thing in there we'd like to change. Well, Jack said at that particular point, well, he said, I knew I wasn't going to get anywhere. And I said, thank you, and walked out. So he wanted more development, more explanation of the rituals looked at, and no one was prepared to do it. In reflex, from retrospect of what he told me, they weren't prepared to sit down there and make changes and write out new documentations. It always comes back to that. People who want the changes asked about the changes, and the people who say no don't want to write anything about it.
Was Jack the first person you met from Prairie Rock?
Yes, he certainly was.
He knew you were coming, right?
Yeah, well, I've said this many times before. I guess I'll repeat again. Jack was the second person. I'll talk about that later. But he was looked upon before by some people because of his abilities at magic. He was a real magician, and he was involved in it. But he, when I met Jack, most people know the story, but I'll just give it a quick repeat. I wrote up to him, asking him about the order, was it still going? I'd written to Percy Wilkinson, and Percy Wilkinson took my letter down to Jack, and they were trying to figure out who the hell I was and what age I was and so forth. Anyway, Jack went to bed that night and had a dream, and it turned out that he said that there's someone coming up to see you. Apparently it was me, and I was to be given all the help I could get. And Jack trusted his dreams. And when I went up to see him the next day, and it turned out that I walked into a room full of people. I didn't know them. Half of them I still don't know. And Jack said, tell him what he wants to know. So he presented me to these people. I didn't know half of them. Later I knew some of them. And I was just a bit of a mystery, and I started asking me questions, and I was answering all the questions all right. So anyway, that was the start of a relationship with Jack, and it never stopped. It went on for quite a while.
He was in a wheelchair, yeah? Jack?
He was in a wheelchair. I used to sometimes I'd get him to go down to the hall right beside the OTR hall, and when you put Jack on the floor, you take off like so he had electric, as if he had an electric motor. He was all over the place, there, back and forth, and he was teaching me to do the circumambulation at a certain pace. He would be right behind me, he'd come up and nudge me, he said, move it, hold back, don't go forward, pick this up, do this. It was everything. It was incredible. So the wheelchair was not really an impediment to Jack at all.
I remember you telling me you could hang the banner sometimes around his neck.
Yeah, one of the funny parts about Jack is that in the OTR they used to do some exorcisms, and they went to a place where people had died, I think during the flu, Spanish flu epidemic, and so they carried Jack up there in his wheelchair from the OTR, and he got there and things started moving around on the floor. Anyway, so Jack put his sword in his hand and his banner of the West over and saying, I am greatest sergeant of the RRAC, and I command you, blah, blah, etc. Anyway, things started to get really hectic then. So the people that picked him up took off down the stairs and left him sitting in his warehouse. And Jack's up there going strong with the sword, demanding these entities leave alone. Well, anyway, after a while, they decided they'd forgotten Jack and come back up, and Jack had finished what he started to do. It didn't take him too long, and everything was quiet. There was nothing moving around the floor, no noises, anything. And last I spoke to Jack on that subject, there was no problems with it ever since. So he was quite adept, and this is the respect that he got. Von Dadelszen could never have done that.
We know quite a lot more about him also through your writings, through different other posts and things.
Especially your forum, yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's move on then. Percy Wilkinson, a 6 = 5.
Yeah, Percy was in Napier, and he got into the Golden Dawn probably about the 1940s, I think. He was a keen astrologer and a music teacher. A hell of a nice man, big tall fellow, about 6'2", very strong man, spoke very quietly, was an ex-serviceman during World War II. He actually climbed the pyramids when he was in Egypt fighting during World War II, and he took some photographs of it. And Percy was a collector of papers, so Percy supplied me with materials that Jack said. Jack had materials, a lot of it got lost. He would say, go see Percy, tell him I said to give you that material. So that's what happened. So over the years, I would contact Percy, saying that Jack said this. Then in the end, I'd just contact Percy and say, have you got something? He'd say yes, and he'd give it to me. Then I would exchange stuff that I picked up with Percy. So it was a two-way street. Percy knew we were doing the rituals down there in Wellington while he was up in Hastings, Napier, I should say. And there was a person in the OTR who wanted to be taught the Golden Dawn, and Percy wouldn't teach anyone. The only one they taught was me, because Jack said it was okay, because he had the dream. So he rang me up and asked me about it. He said, "What do you think about this particular person?" Name was Greg Boag. And I said, because he was in the order, the OTR, they'd just joined. Percy was a little bit unsure about him. And he was starting, I think he had his own temple going. And Percy wanted to know, was it okay? And of course, it worked with me and Jack, and Percy thought it would work with him as well. So when he turned up to get the initiation, Percy turned up with a Naught, and Greg Boag had turned up with a 5-6. And so Percy said, "Oh, what the hell, he ought to shut anyway." So I gave him a 5-6. And Percy regretted that one. But so that's what happened. And Greg formed his own temples, which didn't last too long. He had no instruction from Percy at all, or Jack, regarding the Golden Dawn, but he had done the OTR stuff. And so he formed his own temple and was, he wanted me to give him a 5-6 at some stage. And he came down to Wellington. We had a downstairs apartment that was free. And I said, "Okay, you can stay there." And I said, "All right, just to make sure I said, "I can't give you a 5-6 because I don't know what you can do." I said, "But I'll give you a couple of tasks. And if you can do these particular tasks, we're on the way to doing that." So I said, I picked out, I think it was one of the rituals, I can't remember which one. I said, "Pick a diagram you know about." He's picked one diagram. I said, "All right, I'm going to go up there and we're going to, you've got a couple of hours, sit down and write something about it, anything. I don't care what you write." Anyway, 3 hours later, we went down to tell him that dinner was organised. And I said, "What have you got?" So he handed me a piece of paper, and that paper had 5 lines on it. I said, "You've been there 3 hours. You said you needed a diagram. You assured me that you knew everything about the GD, and you can't even finish a diagram." I said, "How the bloody hell are you going to talk to people if you don't know the diagram, if you don't know what the diagram means?" He said, "Oh, well, I instinctively know." I said, "Well, how are you going to pass this instinct on to somebody else? By osmosis, the magic touch?" And of course, after that, we didn't see eye to eye. Of course, so that was one of the things through Percy and this gyrated. Now, Greg Boag has done a few posts on the Golden Dawn or in New Zealand. Some of them are on YouTube. I think some have been taken down. But he joined the Socros and was in the Socros for a while. He still may be. So that's the story on that. No hesitation in mentioning his name on this. One of the other point too with Greg, when Percy passed on, Noni, Percy's wife, asked me, what could she give the papers to the boys, which was Greg Boag and Mike Burden. Mike's a nice guy, very much Percy-esque in his approach and appearance. And I said, "Well, I've seen everything Percy's got." So, and it turned out that I found out Percy had 1 or 2 things that I hadn't seen. I rang up Greg. I said, "Look, can you send me a copy of that document? How much are you going to pay for it?" He said. I said, "Listen, you silly bloody idiot." I said, "If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have got those papers in the first place." "Oh, well, you write stuff and you could pay for it." If he knew how much I got paid for stuff in the books, he probably would put his hand in his pocket and give it to me. But
Percy's wife, was she in Fire?
Yes, she was. She was a turn-on. She told me a couple of things too. She said that no one in the outer order knew who was in the inner order. They didn't know who they were talking to. They'd met people, but you've got to consider that all the inner order people would just be wearing the outer order sash.
Yep.
And so there was no way to distinguish who was inner order, what level they were. So he told me that. It was very, very interesting. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that one in there for what it's worth. Come on, next one.
Yeah. All right. So the next one is Barbara Naron, 5 = 6.
Oh, Barbara. What can I say about Barbara? Barbara was a powerhouse. I've spoken about her before. She was about 5'6", a very voluptuous woman, spoke with an incredible upper-class English accent, flashing eyes, someone you wouldn't want to mess with under any circumstances. And she was the one who helped me introduce me to Bethany Jones, which will go on to another area. She was instrumental in explaining things. I would pass documentations on to Barbara after the thing had shut. She was into the OTR, but she was also a 5'6" person at Ferry Royal. And she would explain to me how she trained under Frank Salt and what Frank Salt said to her. One of the things that she said about Frank and her husband, Charlie, he said, when they got to 5'6", she said, "Well, where do we go from here?" And Frank's reply to her was, "Where do you want to go from here?" So it was a snake eating its own tail. She used to get anywhere. That was Frank. Now you got Charlie. I think is the next one. Is Charlie Nan?
Yeah, her husband. So
Her husband Ian Nan and Charlie Nan. I met Charlie. Charlie was
he was 5'6" as well.
Yeah, 5'6". He was a big guy, about 6'3", grey hair, another upper-class English accent, even though these both were New Zealanders, and a high rank in the New Zealand Air Force during the war. And his voice was incredible. Now, Charlie Nairn was extremely gifted clairvoyant. He was friends of von Dadelszen, and they put them through their 5-6. And portal, I think they did the portal on the Saturday and the 5-6 on the Sunday. So the interim wait period, sometimes the upper echelons didn't necessarily be there.
Mm-hmm.
How they did it. Anyway, so Ian felt that he used to play jokes a little bit. And anyway, so von Dadelszen, he went to we're staying at von Dadelszen's that night, or it was later, I can't remember which. And we said, oh, we'd like to do some interorder stuff. And Mikela von Dadelszen said, well, we haven't done much of that. Like scrying and things like that. So I did the equivalent of a path working to see what they would see. So the four of them sat down there, and Charlie knew von Dadelszen had not an inkling of clairvoyancy ability. Charlie had known von Dadelszen since they were boys in World War One, when von Dadelszen had a German name, and Charlie used to protect him against the other boys from being beaten up because he had a German name. So they knew each other very, very well. And anyway, so what happened was that Charlie pretended he saw a unicorn. Before long, all two of the other two were seeing a unicorn. Barbara Nairn knew straight away there was no bloody unicorn there. And she kept kicking Charlie under the shin. Well, Charlie was saying, yes, here's a unicorn. John von Dadelszen was getting all excited. Yes, I can see it now. I can see it. So this was, and what Barbara said to me, she said she was shocked that von Dadelszen had said he hadn't done any interorder work.
Wow.
That's what he told her, and she was shocked at that. That's what Barbara told me. Whether he had or he hadn't, I do not know. But that's the story. He was son of a mayor of Havelock North, and she was a daughter of Reggie Gardner, so they were going to become 8 = 3 and 9 = 3, 9 = 2, respectively, under any circumstances, come hell or high water. They were placed there for a particular reason.
And 8 = 3, who hates the order, and 9 = 2 has never done interorder work.
Well, both of them didn't do any order work. They got together to do some scrying, and Mikela von Dadelszen said to Barbara, she said, oh, we've never done this before. So you can make of it that you will. This is the upper echelon. This is not the lower levels of the temple, but this is what it was like when you had elites at the top and the other people who were working their tails off underneath. But anyway, go on.
All right. Next one, Bethany Jones, 7 = 4.
I spoke to Bethany on the phone twice, and I realised I've actually met her on 2 occasions. She had done the 16-year boater course, and I think they had trouble, her and her husband Ray, they were having trouble with where they were living. And von Dadelszen thought it'd be a great idea, this is before the temple shut, just before, that if he got Bethany over to live in the house, that would be ideal under normal circumstances for her to look after things. And the carrot was they were going to give Bethany a 7.5.
7.4.
7.4. I'm going mad. Call it a senior moment. Anyway, she was a woman not too tall, with glasses and grey hair, mop back, very clear face, clear eyes. She made my cloak for the OTR and with the Nokian letters on it. So we'd met each other and so forth. Anyway, so I'd rang her up, thanking her about giving me all the Golden Dawn tarot cards. She'd give me a couple of shoeboxes. So I had quite a lot of the Golden Dawn tarot, blank tarot cards. And she was the one concerned that she thought that we hadn't been closing the tablets when we were using them, because we hadn't. We were still learning at that particular point. We'd done we'd done all the Enochian material, we'd done the rituals, but there were little nuances and things that we didn't really know. And this was one of them. You had to close it, keep the tablets over. I'm sure we had done it, and I told Barbara that we weren't sure about that, about the clothing, putting a cloth over it or not, but Bethany made the point that we should. So she was helpful in that direction, helpful to me with giving me advice on the Golden Dawn tarot, the cards, about painting them and things along those lines. She was the one chief. She was one of the chiefs, but the final chiefs There was Von Dadelszen, but Nancy Hopson and Bethany Jones.
When you say chief, order chief or temple chief?
He was an order chief, actually. Bethany was one of the few that made people. She would go down and do a test with her. She would make people do the tests, and
As it should be.
well, she was keen on that because through Bota, she had all the necessary experience. As a matter of fact, she even used some Bota lessons thrown into it to make it a bit easier. Anyway, it would have made it a hell of a lot easier. So she was a very nice lady, and she suffered actually later in a later stage with dementia. But when I spoke to her and met her, there was none of that. I saw nothing of that, although people have told me that. She was talking to people, and Havelock was saying there's going to be a secret meeting tonight. People she didn't know or weren't in the order, so that created a bit of a problem. But I've only heard that from people. Whether it was actually true or not, I don't know. But I'm going to throw it in there to show you that she was dementing, and she blamed John von Dadelszen and Nancy Hopson for bullying her into closing the temple. She didn't want to do it.
Huh.
But she was in a situation
Many
where
of them didn't want
she was,
to.
she was failing and with her health, and that was one of the problems and issues.
Next one.
Yep.
Prior Wintle. 4 equals 7.
Yeah, Pryor was the first one I met from Ferry Row. He was a musician from an orchestra. I think it was I don't think it was New Zealand Symphony or not. He was very high up in that, and he was born in South Africa, I think, but he came to New Zealand, spoke with a quasi South African New Zealand accent, and was mad on the OTO, I should say. Was very keen on that. At the time I met Pryor, he was...
Did you say OTR or OTO?
OTO. He'd been in the OTR, and he wanted to join the OT. He'd been in the OTR, he wanted to join the OTO, or he was a member, and he'd written some stuff on the tarot from his own and work, which he showed me. It was very, very interesting. It wasn't Golden Dawn stuff. It was the work of someone else. Anyway, someone else's tarot, and he went through it. And he told me about Jack Taylor and how Jack was the main centre of everything. And he told me about Von Dadelszen. So I had a clearer picture of what was going on. I had written to Von Dadelszen about the order, and Von Dadelszen said no, it had shut. But I didn't believe him because I felt there was something going on. And then I found out about the OTR, and I found out about the rivalry between Von Dadelszen and Jack. And Pryor was instrumental in getting me into the meeting Jack Taylor, and Percy explained, he told me who Percy was, and he had that aspect, so he was instrumental in doing things. Pryor was a very unusual person, not a likable person by any stretch of the imagination. Pryor was creepy, if you look at him, and his main concern was chasing young women from the OTO, and he went back to South Africa, and one of them followed him over, whom I had interaction with at some point. And didn't work too well there. But Pryor was really not thinking above his navel, to be quite honest, in that particular case. So he was still instrumental in me doing that. I think he's passed on. He may not have been, but that's all I know. He went to England and tried to learn how to tune pianos, but he found out that the place where they were all staying to learn all this were all young fellows, and they would keep up all night and couldn't get to go to sleep. So he never got a chance to regain his equilibrium that he had when he was a member of the Symphony, New Zealand or Wellington Symphony Orchestra. Anyway, who else?
Next one, of course, is one we've heard a lot about. Frank Salt, 7 equals 4.
Well, what do you say about Frank? I like Frank. When I first rang Frank up and spoke to him, and he sent me a letter. It was the craziest letter I've ever read about burning your books, and you don't need this and you don't need that, and how Crowley was killed. How Crowley was killed when he fell off a cab and a stake went through his heart. Well, of course that didn't happen, but Frank believed it, and so he really was a nice bloke. Jack and him hated each other.
Hate it.
Oh yeah,
I know you said they've often butted heads. And
well, it was just a total. Well, like I put a dislike bordering on. I don't want to see that person again. This type of situation. But I got on a bow. I had no problem with Jack. I told Frank that I was learning under Jack, and I think he probably listened to me despite Jack. But anyway, so he would send me letters and we would discuss things. And sometimes when Jack would know something, I'd ask Frank and Frank would tell me. Then Jack couldn't figure out how I knew. I'd never tell him. Uh, so I was Frank. Frank was never a teacher to me. Jack was, but Frank was helpful to me. If I had a problem, I'd ring up Frank or I'd write to Frank, and Frank would suggest I do this, this, or this. So this went on for about a couple of years, and he came down to Wellington. We met him, and we found out that he'd done a small booklet on the Golden Dawn Tarot. I think that was after the place shut, because he was very interested in the tarot and wanted people to understand a little bit more about it. I was quite surprised that he never saw the convoluted forces, which was the highest point of the tarot that Mathers wrote, and for some reason or another, but they never had it for Freyra. If they did, they didn't tell Frank. But he didn't need it. He did his own thing, and he was quite happy with that. Wrote a whole lot of papers, but when he got older, he was putting all the papers that he wrote to one side and saying, "You don't need that. You don't need that." So in his later years, he was very much pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, and yet Frank was writing papers left, right, and centre. He was I think he was a warden, then he became a demonstrator, and so he was really a very interesting fellow. His father was a preacher. Tony Fuller knows a lot more about Frank than I did, but anyway, I just had to pass that on. Next.
Evon Salt, 5 = 6.
Oh, what a lovely lady she was. She was Frank's ex-wife. I'd met her at the Nan's place one time when I'd brought a Nokian chess set up from Wellington, and Barbara Nan and Ian Nan were playing chess with Chris and one of our students, and the other student was looking on, very, very open eyes, staring at how that thing worked. Anyway, so I said I wasn't interested in chess at that stage, so I sat down. I played enough Nokian chess. I didn't want to play it again. So I came over and sat down next to Evon. And when Evon, she'd known about me, she knew I had the 7-4 under Jack. And so I had Regardie's book in my hand. And we started talking about the varying aspects of the portal. Evon had played years and years and years at varying aspects of the varying officers' positions. She loved the officers' position. And she explained to me how things worked, how the Hegemon would send influence through the pillars and control the Celestes and the Doge, how they would work on that particular situation. She explained it from different angles. Then she explained the God form aspect, which she was only a portal at that stage, but they gave her the 5-6 before the temple shut. But her abilities were way in excess of anyone's ever met. She knew more about the God forms and how they interacted through the officers, not on their own, but through the officers and functionality than Jack and Frank did. And I sat down with her for a while. The chess game went on for something like about 4 hours and numerous cups of tea. But Evon said she gave me the whole ball of wax of the God form interaction, the attraction, repulsion formulas within there. And it just flowed out. I've never seen anything like it. No one had that knowledge that I ever met at Freyra, including Frank and Jack, because I talked to both of them about that. But Evon, straight out, and it was all by her experience at being it. So she was a wonderful, wonderful lady. Next.
Jonathan Colett, 4 = 7.
Jonathan Colett, we met when we came up. He was a 4-7 member of Freyra, a member of the OTR. He was going into, I think he was also into Crowley at that stage, and I think he was either joined the OTO or was a member of it. I couldn't quite tell at that point. He was a young guy, about 28, when I met him, and he kept calling me Mr. Zalewski. I said, "My name's Pat." I said, "Mr. Zalewski is my father, and he's dead." Oh, no, he's over in Australia. I think that words to that effect. So he actually gave me quite a few tips on how the Chiefs had this and the Chiefs had that, and he gave me some instruction on it. Jonathan would be in his 60s now. He's still alive. I reached out to him, but he hasn't got back to me. I got on pretty well with him. I had no problem. When I went for my 6-5, it was Jonathan Colett that did the stand guard outside Jack. He came up to Jack's place and Jack said, "Stand outside for about an hour while I went through the 6-5 under Jack." So that was interesting. He was very, very interested in the OTR, and he stuck with it. He never went. I don't think he ever went back to the OTR. The OTR was interested in the OTO, so he concentrated on that. I got getting mixed up with the OTO and the OTR.
They're
But
quite different, yeah.
he was well respected by the people in the OTR, very knowledgeable. But he was trying to get people to do rituals in the nude. Of course, when you get people, I remember Barbara and Ann telling me this, and Barbara was very, very curvaceous. She said, "Well, in my younger days," anyway, but not at the moment. She said, "Gravity defies me." I couldn't stop laughing, but he was convinced that people should do rituals in the nude. But he was so convincing, it was. He even said to Jack about it. Jack knocked him down. He said, "No." Can imagine a pair of elderly people in their 60s running around.
Well, you can guard the temple in the nude if you want.
It wouldn't be very good for the eyesight. I know I'm 76. I know what I look like, and trust me, you don't want to see. And that was in my younger day. It was exactly the opposite. But anyway, that's the way the world works. Right,
the next one, we don't have a first name. She's the mother of Alison Lty. So
yeah, Alison
Lty 5 = 6.
Yeah, Alison Lty was a student of Jack's. I think he actually put her through the Norton at one stage. She mentioned to me about trying to find the right shoes. And anyway, so Alison was always in the OTR, and she wanted to know more about the GD, and she was always working at it. She was a very intelligent lady. She was, she's still alive today, as far as I know, or she won't talk to anyone. She's very, very, has issues, and we got on well for her, and we've known her for many, many years. Anyway, so when I used to go around and see Alison, her and her mother and father had this beautiful home in Havelock North, wonderful flowers all over the garden. And Alison was an artist, and she had a wonderful art studio in the home. But mental health had taken a toll on her a little bit, but it's a very, very nice lady. And when we used to go around to see her, she would then introduce me to her mother, who was a 5/6 in the temple. And we had a chat to her mother a couple of times about certain things. So it wasn't a very long conversation, but we did make the connection. And her mother did make a comment or two about certain things. I actually asked Alison to ask her mother to clarify a certain point to me, and she did. She didn't like talking about it. She would keep it quiet. But her and Alison's father and mother were both 5/6 members. When I went through the rituals proper with Jack, Alison was the sentinel outside, and she was told not to let anyone in if they come into the OTR hall, and Jack swore under an oath of secrecy not to reveal anything to anyone, which he took very, very seriously. But Jack was helping Alison with his colour healing. But yeah, that's it.
Our next one is an Adeptus Major, 6 = 5, John Reed.
Oh, if there was a nut, it was him. Tony Fuller knows more about him than I do, but I had met him. He was he was a guy that had a lot of stuff from the the Cromlech Temple, and he was a hypnotist. He used to hypnotize people, and people thought he was doing black magic. But he'd swipe all the rituals, the original rituals and papers, and wouldn't give them back. Tony found that out. And when he said to me, he said, "What rank are you?" I said, 7-4. "You can't be a 7-4. I said, "Why, you need 3 people to put you through," and so forth and so on. I said, "You know, Matt has got his 7-4 and by letter." Huh? So, yeah, there was that sort of thing. And so he was very, very, a little aggressive, but okay up to a point. But my knowledge to him was very limited. He was, I think he was in contact with the Wrens, with Beryl Ren, I think at some stage where he got the Cromlech Temple stuff. But again, Tony Fuller is that particular area, knows more about that. And I'll let him talk about John if he wants to. Next one.
Joy Wallace, 5 = 6.
Well, Joy Wallace, I spoke to on the phone. I never actually met her. I spoke to her about twice. I was talking to her about yoga and meditational aspects in the 5/6 course when she went through it. Now, she was the wife of Alistar Wallace. Alistar Wallace was a 5/6 member of the order, and he was the one that took invited Anne Davies out and was helping her, as the saying goes. And when she came out to New Zealand, and he's instrumental in formulating Bota in New Zealand. And very much a ladies' man. When the ladies saw Alistar, they just went weak at the knees. I reckon even Mrs. Falcon had a warm spot for Alistar. He was a bit of a chick magnet, I think, in plain language. He's one of those guys that had it no matter what it is. And he was Joy anyway. I asked Joy a couple of things about the meditational aspects and about the yoga, because she was doing yoga and teaching yoga and yoga breathing, and she told me a little bit about it. I remember stuff from Jack. So they didn't like the alternate nostril breathing. Jack vetoed in he wouldn't teach that. He said he felt it was not quite right the way they were doing it, and Joy agreed with him. She said there was people that had issues over alternate nostril breathing. There was a couple of things like that. But anyway, so that's someone I just spoke to. I never had much really to do with other than that.
Fair enough.
Who's next?
John Taylor, 2 = 9.
Well, John Taylor was Jack Taylor's son. He'd been through Whareroa up to 2 = 9, but his interest, after Jack left, his interest at that time in the 60s took him towards the OTR. John was head of the OTR for many years, and I knew him quite well. And when the book Islands of the Dawn was written, the author was actually, I sent him up to see John to get more additional information out. But John was very, very good at what he did. He never had the same flair for magic as his father did, but he was stable, strong, supportive, but not Jack's ability nor Jack's acumen in that particular area. So he was a nice guy that I got on pretty well with. He put me right on a couple of things about Miss Falcon and Mrs. Falcon, about daily habits, what they did, what they didn't do, because he had met them a number of times. And he told me why I didn't go back to the order, because he was more interested in the OTR, because that wasn't the teaching order, the OTR was the doing order. He had to do and produce magic. That was that. Okay, next.
John Miller, Portal.
Well, I never met John, but I spoke to him on the phone a number of times. He was the one that Bethany Jones told me. I was asked Bethany Jones a little bit about magic squares and who was doing what, because some of the magic squares and the seals and sigils in the Whareroa documents were rubbish. They didn't fit at all. And so what happened was she put me on to John Miller. He lived in Rotorua. It's possibly still living, I really don't know. And when I said, well, look, my main concern for talking to you about this is, what did you do with them? He said, oh, no, I didn't do anything with them. She said, I was just more interested in finding out how they worked. And I said, okay. So that didn't go down too far. And I'd sent him a copy of my Nort book, which he didn't like. He said, there's too many errors in it. I said, okay. I sent it to other people as well. Percy corrected it. Went through and had a look. He said it was pretty much okay. And I checked with the Nans. They said it was all right. And the person who did the editing on the Nort book was Robert Anton Wilson's wife, the author, and her name was Arlen, and she was very, very good. Anyway, so he did disagree with me. Functionality, he disagreed with me publishing the Nort. He was not going to give it any credence at all. So that was that. So with John Miller, it came a bit of a blank. And he actually rang me up once. He said, I still don't like your Nort book. I said, good, John, but what else have you got to say to me? He said, well, nothing really. I said, well, you have a nice day. So this is it. This is the secret aspect coming through with these people. But to spend all your time doing magic squares, not know what the hell you're going to do with them, I thought was idiocy. But that's just my opinion.
Interesting. You should bring up secrets, because the next person was never a member of Whareroa, was known for publishing all the secrets, and he obviously came out to New Zealand to see and met several of these people. Israel Regardie, 5 = 6.
Yeah, well, he did. He came out and he spoke to Jack Taylor on the phone. Regardie came out in August of 83. And Regardie was always challenging. He challenged me and Chris. And every time we nailed him to the wall, because there's things he hadn't experience to. And he said, what rank are you? I said 8.3. I said, no, I'm only a 7.4. And he was talking about Nokian chess, and we put the chess set out with no markings on it. He said, what about the markings? I said, well, you don't need them. You can just go by the triangles or how they work. He said, I used to do that too. I said, oh. And he challenged me on about a whole pile of things. And, I held my own, put it that way, very, very well. and we got on very well. I like France. He was a good guy. Very argumentative. When he got on to Jack, he tried to prove a point about colour, because Jack was the colour merchant. I told him that, so he get on the phone. Yeah, now listen, I want to talk to you about this colour thing. How do you explain that? How do you explain that? And of course, Jack liked Regardie by the sound of it, because he sent him a letter when I was there, but he didn't push the system. Regardie was trying to challenge Jack, and Jack would just, yeah, that's a nice day. He wouldn't. He challenged me, he challenged Chris, and he challenged everyone around him. You had to prove yourself with Regardie. If you didn't prove yourself, you got nowhere. And so he came out there and he interacted with Jack, and Jack addressed him as Frater Regardie. And so that was very, very helpful. So he appreciated that. I told him that the Ferro people said that he only never got to 5-6. And he said, they're bloody lies. And he jumped up and down and said, sit down and have a whiskey. I said, I believe you. I said, I know it's true. I know what you're saying is true. There's some things he said that he could never have known if he hadn't been through.
For them, it was more about discrediting him, so that people.
Oh yeah, it was a discrediting campaign. That was a way to do it. So we've got the cat in the background, ladies and gentlemen. So please don't worry about that. The cat is just anxious. Now we have some more. Oh, hang on. But before we get on to the people I know about and don't know, I probably knew when it was put through the rituals. I probably knew about half of them by name, but the others I didn't know. I got to. If you introduce to someone, oh, that's Bill and that's John, that's James, and we're going to do the ritual together, you never ever got that. You never ever got that full name. And somewhere, after they put me through the rituals, I never saw them again. So there was about 12 of them that I know. And after the rituals, we sat down and I asked them questions about their elemental weapons, about all sorts of things, and they would tell me their experiences with it and what they did. So I got a wide background, but half of them I never knew. And like some of the people we met the first day with Jack, we must have met quite a few people, and I knew about half to 3/4 of them in the end, but I didn't know them on that particular day. And I'm terrible with names. I'm forgetting names all the time. But there's got to be at least a dozen that I spoke to I spoke to a couple by phone too as well, but I can't remember the actual names of them. And one guy was saying, he said, I'm over the ritual magic things. We're going into machines now. Machines, you see, yeah, like Tesla. And I copped the same thing when I went up to the Tablelands over in New Zealand. At the back of it, and someone saying, Tesla, whispering around saying Tesla, which is the same thing I heard many, many years before, 20 years before over in New Zealand, or more. So they were using machines. So there was some just put the order to bed, some had just played with it, and some were very serious with it. And some couldn't answer questions that I asked them. But I don't remember all the names. There's too many. Really, you're going through the rituals and you don't know who they were. And Jack organised the whole thing. This is the boom, boom, boom. And that was it. And you just ask a few questions here and there, and that's about it. After a cup of tea, sit down for about half an hour or so, and away you go.
But before we move into the part of the list of the people that you never met, we actually have one more that you've talked to. And this will be the 18th person on this list of people here, which is Beryl Ren, 5 = 6.
Yeah, well, I rang up Beryl. She had very, very hard to hearing. And I rang her up for a reason. I honestly can't remember what it was about. She was on time. Tony knew Beryl much better than I did. I only really had one phone call to her. She was, I asked her that's right. I asked her some questions about Bristol Temple, about the function of it. And she had someone with her, and she was yelling into the phone. But after about half an hour or so, and a bill that looked like a bloody ransom note, a phone bill looked like a ransom note afterwards, we finally got something. She would explain something. She told how Mrs. Carnegie Dixon gave her and her husband the what was it? The Crombic Temple papers, and they were supposed to do them. And of course, she was very great friends with Tony, and a lot went on there. And she told me something of the Bristol setup about how it worked. And in the latter days of the temple, apparently the one they looked up to was Mrs. Carnegie Dixon. She was the main one that they looked at. Carnegie Dixon, the doctor, had died in the 50s, but she was, while in the temple, she was really, Carnegie Dixon's ex-widow was the one that really helped her a lot. Von Dadelszen told me he went over to England, I think it was about, I can't remember the date, it was about 60 or somewhere around there. And the temple was going, and he met two people, young people at that stage, who wanted to continue, didn't want to close the temple. And he came back 2 years later, and the temple had closed. Well, what had happened is that Fred, the one I hadn't met, which we'll get onto in a minute, was given her husband,
Charles Ren.
Charles Ren. He was given a 6'5", AO 6'5", because the temple at that stage were doing stuff AO. All the rituals, so I believe, higher up rituals were AO rituals. And so he got, that's how the AO 6'5" got to New Zealand under the Wrens and given to Tony Fuller. And Tony kept it pretty much under his chest the whole way. He wouldn't give it to anyone, the AO 6'5". He did show it to a friend of mine, Tony Hutchins. I didn't like it that much. Well, I can't say I blame him. But what happened was that all the people that had published the AO 6'5", it came through Tony to Tony Fuller. He had it, and people don't give Tony the recognition for it, but that's where it came from. Nowhere else will you find it.
So that concludes the list of people you either had spoke to or met in person, 18 of them.
And there's 12 that about at least a dozen that I can't remember their names.
Yeah.
And I sat down, had a cup of tea with them and spoke to them, but never did anything. I did ritual with them, but I honestly couldn't remember all their names.
Well, maybe for a future discussion, we'll have more names that pop up.
No, the memory bank is just about cleaned on it. Okay, talk about the ones I know about.
So these are members that you heard a little bit about through the other members, but that you actually didn't meet in person. So the first one is Archie Shaw, 8 = 3.
Well, he was a former chief in 1961. He was a Scotsman, and he was an orchardist, and built his own vault. He had a row with von Dadelszen, the way the temple was being handled, and he walked out about 61, I think, something like that. I had some of Archie's papers. Archie was very good with Percy Wilkinson, and Archie had given Percy a lot of papers, because Percy was 6'5", and including the colour scales that he painted, the Shem paper, the Shem and Porous papers, and some other papers, and Percy passed them on to me. But Archie Shaw later was one of the ones that were Frank Salt to put Tony Fuller through the 7-4, because Archie had built a vault on his, Tony tells me, on his orchard. He was very closed-mouthed, because I spoke to his wife, who was also a high-ranking member. I don't know what it was, but he was 8'3", and he had a lot of power. He was in very solidly in the OTR, and Barbara Nairn remembers Archie Shaw, because during a time a possum got in, I think I put this on one of the other tapes, got into the OTR hall during the middle of a ritual, which I think was a Grail Hellers, because they had the spear and they were using it. And she always remember Archie Shaw grabbing the spear and prodding the possum out, calling, "Here, puss, 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 here, puss, puss," in the middle of a ritual. Then they stopped and kept going after the possum decided to leave. So that was the memories of Archie.
The next one, well, we've mentioned briefly, Charles Ren, 7 = 4.
Yeah, well, he was the one that he brought the Cromlech Temple paper out to Temple out to New Zealand, and Jack and Barbara and all of them became members of the Cromlech Temple because they wanted to give him a start. They liked him. They thought he was a good guy, and I said, "Well, this is similar to what we're doing, so we just get out there and do it." And it didn't last too long. Jack told me, he said they had very elaborate rituals. I said, but but in the rituals I found there was no power. So that was it. And I took Jack's word for it. I was never that interested in the doing of it. I was interested in the study of it. But anyway, so what happened was that Charles Ren was in the middle of a ritual, and I don't know whether it's the OTR or the Cromlech temples, and he died. And Charlie Nairn was the one that held him while he died. He had died of a heart attack on the spot.
Oh.
So that was about 64, I think it was. Well, he was only in New Zealand for a short time before he passed over. And so Charlie told me he remembered it very well because he was holding him when he went over.
Oh. Hugh Campbell, 9 = 2.
Now there's someone should write a book on him. He was a grazier, wealthy grazier. I went to the house some years ago, and his wife let me go through what documents they had left. Apparently, Percy Wilkinson said to me, he said the chiefs were on his doorstep before the body was even cold, getting papers off him because he had all the 9-2 papers, and von Dadelszen wanted those particular papers, anything else he had. But what happened was that I went there in this wonderful old house, single-story house, but very big, different wings to it, massively big place. And all that was left was Campbell stuff. He died in 1967. I was there about 1982. And so we had a good look at the papers here, and I picked up some stuff that were hidden. And I picked out all the stuff there. He had photographed every Enochian page that he could get his hands on. And I've got a letter stating that he asked for certain Enochian papers. I read the letter at his place. And he photographed everything. And he went over to England. He was a 6'5" under Falcon at that stage. And he went over to England about in the 1930s, the same time Regardie was there. As a matter of fact, according to Tony, that they suggested that he contact, or Regardie contact him, or he contact Regardie. I don't know what happened. His wife told me that he was there for 12 months, and he had a flat not very far from the British Library, and he would go there every day and study the D manuscripts. But before he went, or after he was come back, he had all massive, great big papers photographed. These are all photographed, and massively big texts are about bullet that thick, and he had many volumes of it, of all the D papers. So you pick up a D manuscript and you could look at all the original stuff. He had he had most of them, I think. There was probably hundreds of the darn thing, if not thousands. That's one thing the chiefs did not take. They probably didn't know what they were. And so he had some papers stuck behind that Mathers wrote. He was the one that wrote to Mrs. Falcon and told her we had to change the letters in the tablets because he thought he had picked up the right way and our letters were wrong, the ones we were using. And he wrote some very good Enochian stuff which were published. Tony Phillip passed them on to me. And I find that Campbell was a very wise man in some respects, but Jack, again, he told me a story that Ewan was giving Hugh Campbell. He signed his name Hugh for H-U-G-H. A lot of people call Ewan, whether that was with an E. So I really could never quite grasp that. But he signed his own papers with a H. And that all the people at Ferrero called him Hugh. And so he did a lot of work on Enochiana to try and find the different systems in Enochiana, break it down. And he's doing pretty much the stuff that I've done in that latest book. And he wanted to bring it into the order. And he wrote to Mrs. Falcon and said he would contact, but I don't think anything ever came of it, of his own studies. But Percy Wilkinson was studying with him doing Enochian chess. So he mentored Percy a little bit in Enochiana. How much, I don't know. But I think they started off doing chess games. And I don't know what else they got, but Campbell was the one who put von Dadelszen through the... Now, Campbell's can be found in Francis King's book under the name of Hugh Campbell, H. Campbell, of someone who did the Abramelin system, and he had things going bash crash in the middle of the night, and King said, "Oh, I think the person that helped this person was Dion Fortune, was actually Mrs. Falcon when he came back from overseas." Campbell apparently was never going to become chief because he liked the booze too much. That was the story. And I don't think it bothered him too much at all because he just went and kept going what he was doing. Jack had a shot at him once. He once said, "Your talisman won't work over water." And Jack stood up and said, "No, you're wrong, Ewan, you're wrong." Jack was always stuck an oar in somewhere. Go on, who's the next one?
Reginald Gardner, 8 = 3.
Oh, he was... If you get the wayfaring man, Reginald Gardner is the one they referred to as King in the book. He was head of a Quaker group, and they formulated, I don't know how many members in this group, but I think it was quite big. They were quite well off. Harold Large was another member. I don't think he's a member of the order, but he certainly was a member of the Quaker group, and he was the one who helped them organise to look for more spiritual dimensions. They wanted something more. And as a result of that, a Murfield father came out. I think it was Fitzgerald, he was I think an A3 member in the SM, and he started to say, well, look, you've got to see Dr. Falcon. And so they asked Falcon to come over in 1912, and when Falcon came over in 1912, he put 12, they were only there for 3 months, and they put 12 people through the 5-6, all the top echelon. And what happened then, after they did that, was that Falcon came back in 1916. They appointed their own 3 chiefs. Reggie Gardner was one of the main chiefs. And when the good doctor died, Reggie Gardner took over as other chief. And so he was very much a very authoritative person. There was a story about Reggie when one person got Regardie's book in the 1930s and said, and on the middle pillar said, Reggie, this is really good. Reggie took the book, flipped through, said, oh, you really can't have that, and put it in the drawer after he bought it and sent it over from England. And when he used to go to Ferrara, there weren't, it's now a housing estate. Ferrara is completely surrounded by 2-story houses, 3-story flats. And you go through a little, nothing like its former glory as I remember it when it was, when I first saw it in 1981, I think. There was massive acreage and a massive tree outside of it. It was very isolated. Anyway, Reggie Gardner used to get all these people dressed in their robes jumping over paddock fences on the way to Ferrara. Of course, people used to see this and call them Satanists.
Quite far from it.
Reggie Gardner and all those were on the council had the last laugh. They couldn't. And he put on the pageantry plays and did all sorts of things along those lines. And he died about 1959, I think. His wife also was a high-ranking person, and Jack Taylor remembers her as someone who forever seeing princes and queens floating around in the air and things like that. And Barbara said to me, she said, how about they get a pauper up there once or twice rather than... Yeah, Barbara was spot on with the comments, believe me. They'd strike it like this little comment to hit you in the heart. But anyway, so the Gardner's family, the husband and wife were very into it, and the wife was forever seeing things and spoke with Jack. Said she spoke with great authority, but of course, great authority didn't mean it was right or true. But she just spoke with it. That was Reggie Gardner's wife, whom I don't know her name, but Jack did speak about her. Her effect was that a lot of people went into scrying because of her. I can say that. All right, what's the next one?
We got 5 left now. So Bill Gilmore, 7 = 4.
Well, Bill Gilmore was, I always get Bill Gilmore and Bill Oliver mixed up. My ex, Chris, she
Well,
was...
that's the next name on the list, and they're both 7-4, so...
Yeah.
All right.
She remembers Taradale, I think it was Bill Gilmore, and they were selling ice cream to all the kids, and she remembers him from as a kid. I was a Temple member. But he was the one, it was either him or Bill Oliver went over to meet Regardie in the 1970s, and they explained what was going on at Ferrara at the time, and all sorts of other things. He was a very, very strong person. I think he may have been a warden, but I'm not 100% sure on that, but I'm pretty sure he was. I think Bill Oliver took over as a warden as well. Again, Tony Full will probably have more information on that. I know. Bill Oliver was very, very similar. And both of them had wives, almost equivalent rank. So they worked as a duo rather than just as an isolated individual. Campbell worked as an isolated individual. His wife was about 2-9 member of the Temple, and he just controlled, worked what he did. He didn't bother bringing her into the higher echelons at all.
The next one I'm skipping because I'll bring it back at the end. So the next one is Nancy Hopson, 8 = 3.
Well, she was one of the final chiefs and one of the ones that pushed to get Ferrara to shut.
Wow.
Barbara Nan went up to her and she said, well, you just had all these robes made. It's going to cost hundreds of dollars, which in those days was something. Why not give them to other people who want them? She said, let them make their own. So I wrote back to Barbara and I said, next time we see Nancy, tell her we have made our own.
Was she part of the decision to burn all
the
documents down?
Well, Nancy Hopson was a ritualist. She was the one that when someone asked her, what do you do between rituals moving from one station to the other? And she said, walk like an Egyptian. You can just imagine someone walking around that. So she's another one that spoke with great authority. she had, whether she was 9 equal 2, I don't know. I think she's 8 equals 3.
Yeah,
That,
that's what I wrote. That's what
yeah.
8 equals 3. Yeah.
I couldn't remember. It was 8 equals 3 or 9 equals 2, but she was one of the main chiefs. I think probably 8 equals 3. Von Dadelszen didn't like anyone equal to him.
Hmm.
And she, there was a funny thing about her because I was talking with Tony Fuller about it. It turns out that after she died, all the papers turned up in a black bag or something. And as a result of that black bag, the person, Tony tried to get hold of the rituals, and of course, the woman said no. He wanted to offer to buy them through intermediary, and they were going to come over and have a look. Or he's going to send some people over and have a look at them and catalogue them to see what exactly she had. And all of a sudden, they disappeared. The story, we think, was they went to someone in Europe, but we're never able to figure out who or why or whatever. So all Nancy's stuff went west. But Nancy really was very instructive in rituals, a bit like Von Dadelszen, pedantic. You have to do things. Very good in certain things, but just wanted to be in charge mainly, as far as I'm aware. There are other assets too, but I don't know enough about her other than that.
Hmm.
So I'm talking about someone I don't know, and I've just heard from other people. So forgive me if I haven't got that quite right.
No, but still, it's some really awesome information. So you kind of mentioned him earlier. I don't know if there's more to say. Alistar Wallace, 5 equals 6.
Well, why do I say that? I think I've spoken to it about Wallace before, but I'll put it in with this one. He was a 5/6 member of the order, and he was corresponding with Anne Davies at that particular time, and I think he was doing the Boda course. And of course, when he brought Anne Davies out, it transferred, rather than bring Boda to New Zealand, she wanted to take over for Iroa. So anyway, when she came out, Von Dadelszen told me that she was in one of the hotels in Napier and did a star-studded entrance coming down the balcony with a big sweeping dress and changes, glorious red hair and doing the thing. Of course, to the stoic New Zealanders, this probably didn't go down that well, but some of the guys probably thought she was good to look at. Anyway, so she wanted to take over the order, but she spoke in a very funny tone. I want all the brethren to come under me, or something, that in our lost people from New Zealand to do this. And they asked her about the Enochian system. She said, well, we can't do the Enochian system. Of course, Campbell heard about this and put the word out. And of course, no one was going to wear that one. And so she said, well, maybe you can keep that, perhaps. So what happened was Von Dadelszen gave Anne Davies all the rituals, I think up to 9 too.
Wow, yeah, I remember you mentioning that. Yeah.
And as a result of that, when she left, I don't think she didn't get. There was a hell of a lot they never got back. I don't know if the rituals were included, but probably. Now, while Alistar Wallace, who's in charge of all this, getting things, became the chick magnet himself. Became very, very. She became very, very enamored with Alistar Wallace. They used to be enamored with him rather than him being enamored with her. And anyway, at that stage, he was feeding her. She was sitting down there, mumbling certain things. It didn't go down too well what she was talking. She wanted to become the adept of the entire planet, according to Jack. That was the thing she was saying. She came out to Jack's place where they had another meeting with a whole lot of adepts, and she started to. All of a sudden, when Jack was doing an intro to her, she started talking in tongues. And she just went on for about 10 minutes like this, or 5 minutes, or whatever it was. And Jack said, look, he said, I can't have you talking in tongues. We're trying to have a discussion here. And bingo, she goes back talking in tongues again. So Jack said, look, and Jack actually told her to get out of the house. So that was the feeling. Anyway, Wallace was there feeding her water, but Jack took the one look at the glass and smelt it. It wasn't water. It was Jiva gin, I think, at the time. She was pie-eyed by the time she was finished. And what happened was that then she became engaged to Alistar Wallace at that particular point. I think her and Joy had parted company. But Wallace had a temple going, a BOTA temple they were founding it in Auckland. So Alistar Wallace had a roving eye. And of course, even though he goes to Anne Davies, one other temple member whose name I really don't know, I couldn't care less about, they were doing the horizontal mumbo in the temple before everyone got there. So who would walk in but Will Chesterman, who I think secretly was in love with Anne Davies. And there was his arch rival in a horizontal mumbo with position in the temple. Well, so Will was assisting Will Chesterman and Alistar Wallace and Ann Davis. So he wrote straight back to Ann and said that Alistar Wallace was a so-and-so brigand or whatever the case was, and he was doing a natural thing. Anyway, this went on. So Alistar seemed to fade out of the picture then, and Will Chesterman saw the light, and Ann Davis thought, well, Will Chesterman's good. So he became one of top notch in Will and Ann Davis's eyes, and he became the head of BOTA. Now, Will Chesterman was an incredibly hard-nosed individual. It's difficult to have a conversation with. Tony Fuller said he was a man to be reckoned with. But he's friends with Jack Taylor. And Jack Taylor, Will Chesterman went up to Jack and he said, "Did you really get Pat at 7-4? Yeah. You know, he said, well, he didn't think he should have or possible or whatever. Anyway, it turns out that when Jack had, I rang up Will Chesterman. I said, "Look, Jack's dying." It's the first time I ever spoke to him. The reason I'm ringing you up, I know you're a friend of his. You may like to go and see him before he passes over. Anyway, got to the temple. So he said, "Why are you trying to revive a dead order?" I said, "Well, I've got breath. It's not dying, that's for sure." And I said, "You ought to check your overseas connections to see the Golden Dawn revival going on all over the world." I got at the end of the phone. And he said, I said, Toff comes to all places. He said, "It's not Toff, it's Toeth." I said, "Really?" I said, "I didn't know the Rosetta Stone came with a pronunciation guide." Silence at the end of the phone, then I put the phone down. I didn't want to talk to the silly bugger at that particular point. It was useless. He was in one frame of mind. We were, and every time he referred to me was Gutter Press publishing the Secret Inner Rituals, the Golden Dawn, and how I shouldn't have done it, and how he smuggled a copy to von Dadelszen. I thank him for buying one. And von Dadelszen saw the thing before he died. But I had a dream when all this was going on that von Dadelszen, very, very pale, I knew he was near death, came in a dream, just like Jack used to get. I don't have them often, but I do have them occasionally. And reading the book, and he was really pissed off about it. Well, tough, get a crash helmet.
Hmm.
We're trying to promote the order and get as many people into the order. Regardie had already published everything except the higher rituals of the SM, and it needed an airing. And my rituals, anyway, and the high rituals are not those of the SM. Even though I went through the SM rituals to 7-4, I've changed them from the 6-5 and up. I wrote my own.
So now we get to the last person. I kept him for last, so we come around full circle back towards the beginning of the Faira, which is Chapman Taylor, 8=3.
Chapman Taylor was an incredibly talented individual. He was an architect, well known. There's a book on Chapman Taylor by Judy Sears, Seirs, and I think it's by Thames Books. And he went around and built all these houses. There's not much about his esoteric aspects into it, but the only thing that Judy couldn't get was a floor plan of Faira, because all these buildings are heritage listed buildings. But she couldn't get a floor plan for that because of the vault. He didn't give it to anyone. And he was very instrumental. He knew Chapman Taylor knew Will Chesterman. Yeah, now Will Chesterman had a gripe. He tried to get into Faira through the panel, and they wouldn't let him in. They decided no, they didn't want him. At that stage, that's before he formed BOTA or worked with Alistar Wallace. And what happened was that Chapman Taylor did the pillars of Faira. He built the house and did build many other things. So he was a very gifted architect, and he was mentioned also in The Wayfaring Man, but I'm not too sure what his title was. From memory, I think someone said that Reggie Gardner was called King, and I'm not sure Chesterman was involved in it. I think not Chesterman.
Chapman.
Yeah, he was I'm having two senior moments here. He went down with Gardner, and I think they both met Chesterman on the boat, and Chesterman on the boat, Falcon on the boat. I'm going batty at this sort of thing. And what happened was they escorted him by train all the way up to Havelock North. Train went to Hastings and they got a car by
That's
there.
when Falcon arrived in New Zealand in 1912.
Yeah, he had half the stops. They had 12 minutes to knock down a 3-course meal. As Hawkins said, he's never seen anything like it. They got off the train. So they escorted him up there, and it was Chapman Taylor and Reggie Gardner were the ones that met him. And so they kept Chapman's Taylor name out of it for a fair bit, but you will see he's referred to a number of times. His life outside of the Golden Dawn is written in book form. His life inside the Golden Dawn is really not too much known about him, to be honest. Again, Tony Fuller might know more about that than I would. What he actually did. I remember that he carved the pillars, and Chesterman, when he came up to the OTR hall, was measuring all the pillars up. see, but Chesterman was very, very keen with Chapman Taylor. There was a connection there, so that was where that came from. But he still couldn't get into Free Royal. They wouldn't let him in, and he wasn't a big deal at Boater. I don't think he was even doing Boater. I'm not even sure then. But he was told out, and he held that grudge. And now, according to Chesterman, or at that time that I knew him, the Golden Dawn was dead, and the Boater was the superior order. And the Boater people in New Zealand continually referred to themselves as the Golden Dawn. Yeah, it was quite interesting. They held a lot back. Anyway, again, Tony, I bow to Tony's knowledge on that. He's a lot more closer to that than what I am. But I'll just try to give you an overview of what I know in general about these people. Some, it may be, there are other people that I met, believe me. There was at least a dozen more that I mentioned earlier. I can't remember all their names, but I've given you enough information out there. So if someone wants to do research on them, all you got to do is get into Papers Past and do it, and work from there, or talk to people that may know them. So that's about it as far as I.
Thank you very much for taking the time to do this. I know you're a little bit reluctant, and because you know the information's a bit scattered, sometimes it's very minimal, but I'm 100% confident that everyone watching values this tremendously. I mean, you can't get this anywhere else. It's impossible. These anecdotes, these stories, these little tidbits of information, it helps us conceptualize, the culture that was in that temple, and to see how the tradition continued to evolve all the way to the late 70s. So thank you very much for that.
Well, I appreciate that. I just hope that you people out there who are watching this, who want to do more research into the New Zealand temple through the names that I've given you, can be assured that you'll get more rewards. You get a personality profile. Bob Gilbert left all the stuff out because he never had access to the material, but now you do have access to some of the material and some of the people. And now is the time to, if you really want to get into what they did and how they worked, you get a little bit more. So you can add that to what Bob has already written, and it gives you a more fuller impression of the Golden Dawn in New Zealand as such.
Something I forgot to mention in the introduction, today is Sunday, October 27th, 2024. And so this is it for Emeralds of the Sea. Hope you got some value from it. So we'll wrap it up and see you all on the next one.
See you in church.